Hello, listeners. Around this time last year, we had acclaimed author Anand Giridharadas on the show to talk about the power of persuasion and what it takes to win hearts and minds for our cause. His latest book, The Persuaders, touched on something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. That creating safe spaces in our movements is impossible, but that what we can do is create spaces to be brave together. On today's episode of Pushback Talks, Fredrik and Leilani speak with two people whose work exemplifies the power of collective action and collective bravery. Valeria of the Madrid Tenants Union, and Alba Jimenez, a dedicated advocate and environmentalist, and a member of the Tenants Union, are a small part of a growing movement in Spain. Since the housing bubble burst in 2008, inflation, unemployment, and the financialization of housing have converged to create a dire situation in Spain, with Madrid being one of the most affected cities. Since 2008, over 2.5 million people have been evicted from their homes across the country. At the heart of Valeria and Alba's work is the knowledge that, in the same way that our global systems work together to maintain the status quo of commodification, be that housing, healthcare, or food, that those fighting for human rights must also work together, that we need a global movement to fight global actors. But to build this global movement, we need to first build up our communities and fight back together. Let's listen to their conversation with Fredrik and Leilani and see what we can learn about building a community that is brave enough to push back.
I'm Fredrik Gerten, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And this is the podcast, Pushback Talks.
It is
Leilani,
the podcast.
Leilani, and you are the advocate, and you are the main character of Push, the film.
I am. I'm still the main character in that film.
It's a label that you can't really get rid of.
Never, ever. I'm still approached in the streets by people who've seen Push.
And the film keeps being shown around in many countries, even if I now try to promote another film without you.
That's right. So sad. Breaking Social. Everyone go see it when you can.
I came home for a few hours ago after a tour. We met in Montreal, then I was in Toronto, I was in Mexico, and I've been to 5 cities in Germany. So it's been intense.
And you're still standing. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that in all these cities, everybody's been talking about the housing shit, the housing stress, the housing crisis. And they all say it's even worse than before.
Yes.
Is it that bad?
I think it's that bad. I really think it's that bad. And especially, I think these days for young people, young in their careers, people with little money, it's really getting worse, not better.
And then just very quickly, because I know you are totally obsessed and taken by the ongoing tragedy in Gaza, and those homes are being bombed out.
Yeah, in some ways I feel like I've taken a little break from housing to deal with the tragedies unfolding. Originally, on October 7th, the craziness in Israel and the attack in Israel, and since then, the really horrible situation unfolding in Gaza, getting worse by the minute. More than, I think at this point, about 50% of homes in Gaza have been demolished. 7,000 Palestinians have been killed, 1,500 are missing, 3,000 children have been killed. It's, for me, it's devastating. As you know, Fredrik, as some of the listeners will start remembering, we've talked about this previously and my connection to the region, but one of the things that's so scary, I feel like I'm learning how to walk again, learning how to live while a genocide is going on. And, you know, I don't want to go on too long, but I went to the region many times and I could see that things were getting worse. I never thought we would witness a genocide. Even though I was there in 1994 when the Rwanda genocide was happening. And then anyway, I didn't think we would witness a genocide. And I want to be clear that when I use that term, I am using it in the legal sense. A lot of people run around, oh, it's a genocide, it's a genocide. But there is actually a legal definition, and it is the intent to kill or destroy a national, ethnic, religious, racial group. And there are sort of 5 acts that can constitute genocide, and they are, killing, bodily harm, mental harm, etc. And some of the leading scholars, Israeli scholars, are saying that the conditions of genocide are in place. And we know ethnic cleansing is happening because that's when you push a people away from their homes. That's what ethnic cleansing is. So it's very, very heavy, and it's distracted me every minute of every day.
We should actually move into the episode of today.
Yes.
You were, before everything happened down in Gaza, Israel, you were in Madrid at a conference organized by the Green Party in Europe, or the Green Party in Spain. And you met some amazing women, and you wanted us to invite them into the podcast.
Yes.
And here we are,
Yes.
with Valeria Rarco from the Tenant Union of Madrid, and Alba Jimenez, who is a tenant in a beautiful house in the working class neighborhood La Latina, Porta Angel. So welcome to Pushback Talks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So tell us what is happening. Leilani, why are you inviting these girls?
I had occasion, as you said, Fredrik, to go to beautiful Madrid. Such a beautiful city. I had only been there as a child. And so to go as an adult and to be able, I walked and walked and walked. It's a beautiful city. And I was taken by the Madrid Tenants Union, by Javi, to visit a community that's, under siege, a working class community that is being financialized. And I met Alba, and she's amazing, and her struggle is amazing. And I thought our listeners would really appreciate to know what she and the Tenants Union are doing. And then the next day, I had the occasion to sit on a panel with Valeria, and she is dynamic and energized and is going to change the world with Alba. So I thought, bring them on.
That's cool.
We're definitely doing it together, yes.
That's cool. So, we've been talking very much about the housing crisis that kicked off in the financial crisis 2008. It meant that Blackstone entered big time into the housing market in the US, on Ireland, and in Spain. That's the first 3 places they moved in. And in 2013, Blackstone became the biggest landlord in Spain. They didn't only buy a lot of homes, they also bought the debt. And they bought, in the end, also the bank. So they were sitting on both sides of the table, which of course, and since then, 2.5 million people have been evicted in Spain. It's been a very brutal fight. And Valeria, the evictions are still ongoing. Tell us.
Yes. Luckily enough, one of the good sides that we got out of that huge social disaster was the fact that the housing movement in Spain started, right? An organized housing movement started in Spain, particularly with the creation of La PA, right? La Plataforma Afectados por la Hipoteca, the platform of people affected by mortgages. So they did an amazing work back then, and we've definitely inherited that struggle in the Tenants Union as well. Politicizing it, right? Making it, stopping making it an individual problem and making it a collective one that we all were responsible, had some kind of responsibility towards. And it also needed social and collective responses, right? So definitely, yes, one of their huge victories that they managed to truly change the way in which Spanish society understood who the evil was in that struggle, and everyone was on the side of the people who were being evicted due to mortgages. But sadly, what happened, nowadays, evictions due to mortgages are not that common anymore, thanks to that enormous struggle, thanks to big changes that we've managed both at a social level, at the political level, in the ways in which banks have to act, etc. But sadly, what happened, particularly because of what you were mentioning before, we've had big investment funds such as Blackstone and many more, who are now making business with our lives and with our homes, but in a different way. And this is through the rent market. So nowadays, yes, evictions are still happening. More and more evictions are happening every month, precisely because of the rent speculation market that are in the end creating huge rent increases all around the world, but also in Spain particularly. And a lot of what we call even invisible evictions are happening, right? Like when you are forced to leave your house because you don't want to, and maybe eventually you do it voluntarily because you prefer for the police not to come to your door and kick you out. But in the end, your landlord is forcing you out by pushing a rent increase on you. So that's precisely why we're organizing.
And Alba, your home, Leilani, you visited Alba's house and home.
I did.
So what is your situation, Alba?
Well, in my case, I live in, as you said, in Puerta del Ángel in Madrid, in the building of 40 flats in Paseo de la Ermita del Santo 14. And this complete building is from the company Vitruvio Socimi. And what happened recently, it was that they communicate by burofax to 4 flats in the block the decision to not renew the rental contract, leaving 11 people out of their home. And they don't offer them any kind of negotiation in terms of rental prices. I mean, they were not open to negotiation because their strategy and what they have started doing is to carry out small reforms in the flat that have become empty, putting an electric lock on the door, and they rent the rooms, offering a price now per room in the range of 650 or 700 euros, which means around 2,000 euros per flat. So this price is crazy and is double of what we are currently paying. And of course, most of people cannot afford it. Well, therefore, we have so many reasons to believe that most probably the company intention is to use the same procedure for all the expiring rental contracts and continue establishing abusive temporal contracts by robbing the whole building. Also, it is not just our building, but in the whole neighborhood is happening this, because it is undergoing a particular accelerated process of rent increases as more and more buildings are bought by vulture funds like Madrid as well. That they have bought 30 buildings in our neighborhood. We are now forced to leave. But fortunately for us, it's true that we got in touch with Sindicato de Inquilinos de Madrid that helped so much in this issue. And we have joined the movement Nos Quedamos, so we stay in English, to negotiate with Vitruvio. And this has allowed many of the tenants that had to leave to still stay in their homes, still paying, of course, but not giving up in the attempt to negotiate new house contracts.
So you fight back, which is very important, of course. But Leilani, how do you read this? Is this renoviction or is this converting homes into the short-term market?
Yeah, I would put it as financialization for sure, because they're trying to extract more wealth per square meter from every unit, right? By renting beds rather than renting the whole flat. It will attract short-term renters, obviously. And I walked around the neighborhood where Alba's living. First of all, I should say her building is beautiful. The neighborhood itself is positioned such that it's very attractive neighborhood. It's not in the city center of Madrid, but it's close enough. And now it's really easy to get from Alba's neighborhood to the city center, because they put this major highway underneath, under the ground, so like in a tunnel or whatever. So
now it's greener.
Yes, exactly.
Because I remember that talk we had we met people in the US, and there was like a movement in especially Afro-American neighborhoods that it's green enough. We don't
yeah, that's right.
We don't want a park.
Yeah.
If you take away this noisy road, we will not be able to live
afford here.
So
exactly.
So you make the city more beautiful, you make it more friendly for human beings to be there, for children, for families, but then you want to swap population. You want to kick out the...
That's right.
And which is like, how can you... what's the point of being a mayor of a city and you're trying to make the city greener and then you kick out the population? It's like it's...
Exactly. And the buildings that are being bought and refurbished, they look very, what to say, like that they're trying to attract maybe digital nomads, like hipsters, just the way the buildings look. It's clear, the ones that are being purchased by these hedge funds and financial actors. But if I might, Fredrik, Alba, can I ask you your particular circumstance? Like, when is your lease ending? And what does it look like for you? Will you leave? Are you fighting it?
Well, in my case, we signed the contract after 2020, so we still have time. I mean, because in our case, as it's a big company, it lasts for 7 years, the contract, but it is not the case of many of the people from this building. And so we decided to join the movement because even if it was not, well, like an urgent case for us, but we are engaged with all of our neighbors, and we really believe that this is very injustice, and we want to be part of helping others and not just worry about ourselves, but to other people. And in any case, it's going to happen to us also in a short-term period, I mean.
So your lease expires 2027.
Yes.
Right. But I remember meeting another woman with you, and her lease was expiring in May of next year. And I asked her, she's unemployed at the moment, and I asked her, what will she do? And she said, move back with her parents, maybe. There was no way she could afford anything in the neighborhood, and she was really going to be displaced.
Yes, it's the case of many people here in the neighborhood and in our building, but also in Madrid, that cannot afford the price of renting a house, and they need to come back to their homes because even with 30 years old, you cannot emancipate. You don't have enough money. Also, the salaries are not good enough, and life is continuing increasing in price. So it's really difficult for young people, especially, but also for other vulnerable collectives that are suffering this situation.
It is kind of interesting because the prices are going up everywhere, but the salaries are not going up. You know, the salaries have been kind of not moving at all. And maybe some people make even less. And I mean, in Spain, there is 15% unemployment. So it's kind of brutal. How do you see this, Leilani? What are your advice to the Spanish government and to the local government of Madrid?
Well, I'm actually interested to hear, if I can ask Valeria, because I don't know, like, from the outside, we always hear that Spain is pushing for a new law at the national level for stronger protections for tenants, and it keeps getting stalled. And I want to know, like, if that gets adopted, will it help? And I think there's a law that's being talked about. But then also, what are you pushing for at the city level? Is Madrid, the city, doing enough? And that I actually don't know. You know, there was a very good mayor in place at one point, and then a mayor that was less friendly to tenants. So,
well, yeah, I guess we need to be honest about the fact that one of the, like, in the WHO's playing a very essential role in this, and at the moment is having a very negative impact in this, are also the institutions, right? Like, we have to be very honest with that in the end, sadly, governments all around the world, both regional governments and national governments, are complicit in the fact that the right to housing is not fully, achieved by everyone all around the world, no? And they are complicit in that. Like, we have to be very honest about the fact that the global finance market is very tightly linked to governments all around the world. And sadly, that is also happening in Spain, no? Like, in the end, what we need here is for governments to be brave enough to put themselves on the side of people instead of on the side of money makers and the finance market and all of that, no? And sadly, that is not happening. At the local level, you're mentioning, no, Madrid City Council itself is actually one of the key promoters of a big urban development project that's happening in Alba's neighborhood, that it's also part of this huge touristification, gentrification, population swapping process that's happening there, right? Like we were talking earlier about making a city greener and that at the same time kicking people out of it, right? Like we need to actively talk about green gentrification. Like we need our cities to be better places. We need our cities to be greener and to be renaturalized in a way, right? But at the same time, we need to increase renters' rights and we need to decrease speculators' rights, right? Like that is how it works, how the balance works. And then at the national level, yes, Leilani, you're right. We've been fighting for what has been the first housing law in democracy, we could name it, in the Spanish democracy, right? In the end, we're a very young democracy because we went under a long dictatorship for a few decades. And there was still no housing law. There was no real law that fully tried to see how we can make sure that Article 47 of our Constitution, which recognizes the right to housing and the not right to speculate with housing, which is very interesting as well, that is in our Constitution, but still is not respected. So we've been fighting in the housing movement for a housing law for many, many years. And with the last government, we were quite excited, right? Because in the end, it's supposed to be the most progressive government of the Spanish history, a coalition, and all of that. It's true that from the social movements, we've always been quite critical, right, with the institution's approach to this, because we understand that also because of this link that exists between the finance market at the global level, institutions won't be able to fully solve the problem ever, right? And that's why we put a lot of energy into organizing ourselves, not only through our own conflict, but also what Alba was saying, right? By creating communities that go beyond that individual approach that we sadly have inherited and are continually replicating in our social dynamics, right? So what Alba is saying is I'm not in that situation right now, but my neighbor is, and therefore we're in this together. There is also a key of organizing, right? And that will make us change the things. But sadly, in our negotiations with the national government around the housing law, it has not met our expectations, no? And at the moment, in May 26th, the housing law was approved. Sadly, nowadays, the rents are still not regulated or intervened by any way in Spain. Even in Catalonia, in the region, they are trying to make it, the local government, because in the end, this is a competency debate once again, right? We always talk about this, who has to do it and who has the right to do it and blah, blah, blah. Is it the European Union? Is it the national government? Is it the local institutions? So there's always that debate. What we ask for is from the social movements, whoever has to do it, please do it, right? We don't care about how you manage, but there's a necessity there. But no, sadly, that law hasn't had an effect up to now. And even the one thing that could have an immediate effect, for example, we have managed to win a historical fight for the tenants movement, which is to not have to pay agency fees. We know that real estate agencies play a huge role in also radicalizing the private market, right? And in making landlords seek more rentability from their assets, because they are not homes anymore, they're assets, right? And we have managed to win that historic fight, and now it is illegal to make tenants pay for those agency fees, and still we have hundreds of agencies that are still making tenants pay, right? So this is also very important for us to think how, once a law is passed, how it is actually translated to real life. Because if in the end, the power dynamic is still present, a law in the end can just be paper, right? They can be just words. You were talking about Gaza and the conflict before. We know there are many international laws that could be applied, but in the end, we have to be brave enough to apply them. And that is the issue in the end.
That's great. Alba, what do you say?
Yes, I totally agree with Valeria. I think that there are not enough measures in the new approved housing law by the Spanish Congress. And also the ones that are approved, I don't think they are really making a difference. And also, very importantly, something that it was requested, but by so many collectives that it was like to impose caps on touristic rental intense areas. They didn't even talk about that. They didn't take it into consideration in the new law. And so I think it's a bit disappointed, and we need to work more on that.
I mean, my new film is very much about how the super rich are, in some way, are buying politics or buying the public agenda through their investment in strategic communication and so on. And in their world, neoliberalism is still the thing, which is strange because, I mean, in Push, we have Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate, who says it didn't work. It doesn't work. The trickle down never worked. You know, we know all this, and so the model should be doomed, but it still lingers on. I actually saw here when I was in Germany that the new chairman of Merkel's party, CDU, Friedrich Merz, he's an ex-BlackRock executive. So he's not in government now, but I mean, they are not far away. And he describes himself as socially conservative, economically liberal, you know? But what does it mean to be socially conservative? Does it mean that you take care of your society? Because the economical liberalism is kind of killing the same socially, you know, so there is a contradiction there. But you meet a lot of these, you have those guys in Canada also, don't you, Leilani?
Oh, we most definitely do. I was just thinking, you know, I wonder if we tracked the demise or the downfall of neoliberalism, if we would find that the one area where it's holding the strongest still is housing. I bet this is true. I mean, we would need to track it, but there's no doubt that in the housing sector, neoliberalism continues to be the dominant ideology. If I come out and say anything like on social media or in a speech presentation, and I start trying to take down neoliberalism, it's when I receive the most hate. Even more hate than when I start talking about Gaza, to be honest. So, it's amazing to me how certain people really want to hold very strong to this idea of trickle down, even though we see, and tenants are explaining. I mean, that's the other thing. If you don't understand human rights, then you're not going to understand that tenants themselves are the experts. They know. And they're telling us it isn't working. They are suffering. They are unable to pay the rent. The other thing I wanted to just comment on that Valeria raised, which is actually both Alba and Valeria raised, which is this failure to implement. So, you know, I'm learning. I'm old now, right? I've been the advocate for a long time, and you know, it's step by step. So we get even a small, decent legislation, and it means nothing. We have to then work as hard as we did to get the legislation to implement the legislation and to implement it consistently. And I mean, it's like a constant struggle. We call it the implementation gap, where there's laws, great or okay laws, but they're just not being implemented. And it does seem to be, as Valeria mentioned, a matter of courage. It's almost like politicians have fear to do the right thing. I find it remarkable. I mean, I think we're living in such crazy times where doing the right thing is harder than doing the wrong thing.
But this tenant movement in Spain are still an inspiration to the world. You are taking the fight. You have moved legislation. You have blocked physically evictions for thousands after thousands of people. So, I mean, resistance is actually also paying off. Tell us more about your work, Valeria.
Exactly, and I would say that we have many more plans as well, right? Because in the end, as you mentioned, yes, the system is being sustained not only by the finance sector, which is fully interested in this not changing, right? And let's remember something that for me is always key to have in mind. 2/3 of the global wealth is invested in real estate. So we know that the richest people on earth make a living for themselves and for many generations after them due to speculating with housing. So we know that they will do everything they can for this to not change. So we know that we have that aspect to take into account. We know that politicians are also hard to come to work with them or for them to have the courage. But then we also have to work with our own ideas, right? And in the end, the neoliberal project is not only an economic project, it's a social project as well. It's a political project as well. And after many decades working through colonial dynamics as well all around the world, in the end, many of us have these aspirational myths, right, that we want to really get to. So many of us, like many people, even being a tenant, will defend a landlord because the aspiration is that one day they will be a landlord themselves, right? And that is what we're working with, and we would need to be very aware of that. So therefore, our work as an organization is also mostly that, to dismantle all those little thoughts, right? All that puzzle, neoliberal puzzle we have in our minds. So we start building towards alternative ways of living in this world, right? Not only in terms of housing, but in society as a whole, because it's true that our goal is to decommodify housing, but housing cannot be decommodified by itself, right? Like, sadly, most of our basic needs are also commodified at the moment: education, care, health, food, and all of these things. So we need to work collectively. So yes, just answering to your question, Fredrik, is for us it's key to organize and to fight back. One of our key strategies, or one of our strategic approaches from the beginning, has been to organize tenants collectively, right? Like in the same way, like we're very inspired by labor movements and labor unions in the 20th century. And in the same way, in the end, we've done a similar, like we've compared situation, right? And in the same way that in the 20th century, workers had to organize against their boss, against their managers, nowadays, when we know that most houses in the market in Spain are being, like, the landlords are multi-landlords, what we call, right? Like people who have lots of properties. You mentioned Blackstone as the biggest landlord in Spain, but then we know that, for example, Vitruvio, the one that Alba is facing right now, is buying multiple blocks and whatever. So it's the same dynamic, right? We need to acknowledge that our landlord is not the poor old woman who needs an extra income to pay for her pension. Even if that is the problem, then that's again a social problem that needs to be solved with better pensions, not with that woman taking an advantage of poorer people than her because she has an asset, right? So we need to also be aware of that. But in the end, we know that that myth of the vulnerable landlord is not really a reality anymore. Landlords nowadays are basically global corporate landlords in their majority, right? And then, of course, we still have private landlords in each country, but they are replicating the same dynamics that the corporate landlords are putting into the system. So we need to fight collectively against them. And that's why Alba has mentioned, for example, our tool, right? Our strategy, Nos Quedamos, we stay put, we're staying, which means that you're not leaving, you're building a community with your neighbors and you're fighting back. We're also very aware that we need to build together with other organizations. So we're already working with trade unions, with the ecologist movement, with the feminist movement, with the anti-racist movement, right? To build strategies beyond what the housing movement by itself can get into, just to make sure that we reach everything. Because in the end, we need to be aware that, like, this is not the problem that vulnerable, right, like populations will suffer. No, we are made vulnerable because we don't have properties, right? The thing is that nowadays, people accumulate capital by having properties, and those of us who don't have properties are in a vulnerable position in comparison to them. And that is a power dynamic that we have to actively fight back. And I'll just finish off with a last idea that, like, yes, Leilani, you mentioned that, like, it's really hard for institutions to implement what we manage for them to pass after a long time, and then we have to continue fighting back. Well, every day our idea is more clear. We have to walk towards a general rent strike. Like, most of our rights as a society, as the human race on earth, most of our rights have been won not through diplomatic conversations, but because people have fought back, have struck, right? Like, how was slavery abolished? How most of colonial powers lost their colonial countries, right? Like, how was the decolonization process happening? What have we learned from the labor movement in the 20th century? Nowadays, we have an 8-hour working day because people fought for it, because people got together, went on strike because it was illegal, but they still went through it and they managed to earn new rights. So that's definitely what we need to work towards a general rent strike that will definitely make not only institutions but also the finance power to have to really listen to what we're asking for.
Cool. It's good. I like the energy, and it must be very inspirational for you, Alba, also to be in contact with. I just have to add, because I mentioned in the previous podcast that we in Malmö had, in my city here in Sweden, that the landlords were raising the rent twice in a year. And here we have a negotiated treaty, so the tenant union negotiate the rents. But then a number of landlords still put up even 2% more. And then around 3,000 tenants here in Malmö refused to pay the new raise.
Wonderful.
And they were threatened to be kicked out. It was like very brutal. Some people got really nervous. But in the end, they won. So the landlords, they had to give up and say, okay, also the people who had paid the new rent will get their money back. So you can, by collective action, actually win. So thank you. Alba, how did you find out about the tenant union?
Well, I mean, first of all, yes, I would like to say that I totally agree with Valeria and what you mentioned also, that the collective movements and strikes and activism is really, really helping to address all of these social issues that we are living right now. And in going to how we contact with the union tenants, it was a combination. I mean, they were in our neighborhood working and talking to people living here because they knew about the gentrification process and the increase in prices. So they were aware and they were worried about all people living here. So they came to the neighborhood and started talking with some people from my building that were in closer contact with them, and we started to engage a bit with them to know more about this movement. But in the point that was most important was when the burofax arrived to our neighbors, and then we really engaged totally with them. But we had a previous conversation already before because we thought that they were doing a great job, and we, as you said, they are inspiring and helping so much. So we wanted to be with them, helping as well.
Yes. Just to add something, because what Alba was talking about, I just love the name. We organize these things that are called tenant brigades, right? And basically it's what Alba is saying. We just get out on the streets or to a specific building that we already know that some conflict is arising, and then therefore we engage. So I think tenant brigades should be organized all around the world because they're definitely a way of getting in touch with other people.
No, but you know, when they did this race here in Malmö, a lot of people got afraid. And when you get afraid, you can feel lonely. You don't really know where to go. Oh, maybe if I take this conflict, they will kick me out. And so I think a lot of people are feeling like stressed and lonely. So when there is an active tenant union that is stepping out and tell people, don't be afraid. We can do this together. We can fight back. And I think that's the role you're playing is extremely important. And of course, also inspirational for movements in other countries. Leilani, it was a very nice talk, this. I think it's...
Yes. These women are amazing and they are incredibly inspiring. And I'm so happy, Alba and Valeria, you were able to come. And I do want to say that that connection between tenants organizing and tenants unions with employment unions is really key, I think. And we had Chris Smalls on the podcast last week, our previous episode. And I mean, he organized a union of Amazon employees, the first, and very inspirational. You should listen to that podcast. I mean, it will inspire you as you move forward with this idea of a general strike. I think it's super interesting. I just want to say one other thing. When Valeria and I were on the panel together back in Madrid a few weeks ago, she said, and this is what really was music to my ears, she said that when we're dealing with global actors, we need a global movement against them as well as localized movements. And of course, that's what I hope to eventually be able to do with the shift. And of course, Valeria and Alba will come along for the ride, I hope, and we can create this global movement that you're envisioning as well, Valeria.
And that's why we have this global podcast also with audience in 159 countries. It's still, people, it is a global issue we're confronting. And these investors are not so creative. They just copy and paste each other and put money into our homes, on top of our homes, and making our homes unaffordable. So thank you very much for taking part in Pushback Talks, and we really want to follow up and to keep us posted on what's happening in Madrid and in the rest of Spain. So thank you very much for taking part.
Thank you.
Just again, big thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It has been a pleasure.
Yes, to many more tenant unions all around the world, and for us to be connected 100%. Thank you so much, guys, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Leilani, so thank you for one more episode. And
one more episode. We did it.
I think Sebastian, our technical coordinator, he said we now did episode 100.
This is episode 100.
No, that was maybe the last one. I don't know. I'm a really bad in.
We should
celebrate. I was
celebrate.
kicked out of school because I didn't do the math well. So it's like you can't really count on me. But it's a lot of episodes, so you can always go out there and look for something you have missed.
But I love a century party. Is it really the 100th episode? I'm looking to Sebastian. Is this the 100th episode or the last one?
101.
This is 101. So Chris Smalls was 100. You all are 101. You tipped us over into our next century.
Yeah. So thank you and enjoy the day in Canada and the evening in Madrid. Ciao.
Bye.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.